power of Civilization 7's ultimate weapon will have your enemies running scared. It looks amazing. It has a devastating impact. But in this race to victory, it can be difficult to unlock and then meaningfully use the nuclear weapons. Let's explore the path to WMDs, just how devastating they can be, and how this mandatory requirement for victory plays out in Civ 7. The first step to getting nuclear weapons and using them is of course science. This hasn't really changed from previous Civ games, right? You're going to need technology not just to win a military victory because you need better dudes and better units, but there are also specific technologies that you'll need should you want to use the weapons of mass destruction. However, while you may need an aircraft carrier or an aeroplane, a bomber, you'll notice that there isn't actually a nuclear weapon in the tech tree. That's because to get them, we first need to go to war. The unlocking of nuclear weapons in Civilization 7 is ring-fenced behind the military legacy path in the modern age. If we then take a quick look at it, you'll notice that the military victory is actually called an ideological victory. And this time around, we need to gather points. The points are something that we'll return to a little later on, but they're tied to the number of settlements that we capture. And ideology. Ideology can give us a multiplier to achieve this objective much faster. So, we need to unlock political theory, one of the earlier civics in the modern age, thankfully. This will give us the ability to grab one of 3 tried and true civilization ideologies: communism, fascism, or democracy. And they'll boost different yields and give you different powerful effects. For the purpose of this video and using nuclear weapons, I'd recommend communism. Not just the base upgrade, but also the final part of the civic puzzle, the socialism, for its public works policy. More on that later in the video. It's also important to note here that there may be some other ways to get some ideological points aside from capturing settlements, though this one, I believe, a real gimme of an event, is tied directly to the unlocking of my ideology there. So actually, that one's fairly easy to get across the board. Back to the fight though, this is where you'll get most of your points so that you can get nuclear weapons. Of course, denouncing enemies, not denouncing their military presence, but just their general presence, will be very helpful here, because you'll also want to manage war support, unhappiness. Crucially, to build the nuclear weapons, you're going to need a base, as we've learned so far, of science and culture. We'll also need production. You can check in back on the ideological front at any time, just looking in at the dudes, to see when they develop an ideology and which one it is. Unfortunately for me here, my nearest neighbor has the same ideology as I do. However, some of the other players, like Himiko, have adopted different ideologies. So there are options out there. I'd recommend just jumping on your neighbor as soon as you get an ideology, and then perhaps worry about their ideologies a little bit later on. The key here really is to get moving and spread an ideology as soon as you can, capturing and keeping settlements along the way, of course, to boost up the empire. Once you get to your first or second milestone, you'll begin to accelerate the age and maybe knock out a few enemies along the way. This will, of course, add to the race element here. This is very much a race. Let's take a look then at how we can beat the race. A couple of scenarios. Scenario 1, you need to take 20 settlements if you have no ideology. Once you get an ideology, it's only 10. And if your opponent has a different ideology, you'll need to just capture 7 of their settlements, thanks to the way that this points system works. Perhaps a more common example is kind of a mixture of all of them. Maybe you end up needing to take around 8 settlements in this race to unlock nuclear weapons. The capturing of roughly this number, and of course the gaining of 20 points, 20 ideology points, is ultimately what will unlock the nuclear weapons. This also, of course, leads to a strange thing playing out, where you probably do most, if not all, of your militarism before you even get them. I found the most successful strategy is to go on to target enemies, of course, with a different ideology. They probably hate you already, and then try and grab the easiest settlements possible. Not the capitals, like in the past. You're not really interested in taking the crowning jewels of an empire, but rather the easy grabs, the settlements without fortified districts, where you can plow in with your air force or your navy to reach this. the final milestone down this legacy path. It can be tempting to pick up other ones along the way. The scientific one, very easy. Might be a natural blend here. But you shouldn't, of course, because again, this is a race. A race now to unlock and build the Manhattan Project. You'll be able to do it slightly faster. And of course, finally, to win the game. And this is achieved by completing Operation Ivy. First and foremost, though, before we get to that, we need to complete the Manhattan Project, which hilariously is not actually a project inside of a city, but rather a wonder. So you'll build it on a tile within one of your cities. Once it's completed, it will give you a little bit of science and grant you one free nuclear weapon. And this is when you can start to use the nukes. But you'll need a way to actually use the WMDs, to actually deploy them, like a squadron commander. Or one of the more fixed aerodromes, the aerodrome commander. Here you'll have the option to detonate a weapon of mass destruction on a location. Here, you'll notice it's not actually its own unit, but rather an ability, an effect of the commander, wherever there's a bomber stationed, for of course it is the bomber who will drop the bomb within this kind of generous, but ultimately here not all that useful to me radius. Completing or building more nuclear weapons is actually a project. That's why I say completing, because it's a project to complete, not a weapon to build. Which is kind of funny when the Manhattan Project is not a project, but hey, look, nonetheless, we'll look over that. Constructing more nuclear weapons and completing projects more broadly is helped along by communism, by the way. One of the reasons why I picked it earlier on. Through policy cards, of course. Reducing the penalties of war as well as speeding up the construction of more nuclear weapons. To move them around, you therefore need to move your bomber around, right? Because they're not their own weapons, but rather stationed in a bomber. Any bomber, by the way, you don't need to pick one. Just move around the map, find somewhere where there's an aerodrome commander, an aircraft carrier, or a squadron commander, and then drop the bomb. And there you have it. Destruction. On many levels. The population of the settlement obviously fell. And not just the settlement tile itself, but also the adjacent 6 tiles around it suffer from fallout. In this case, thankfully for me, it's enough to completely wipe my enemy off the map. Goodbye, Hatshepsut, see you later. And then I think, alright, it's time to use some of these nuclear weapons in other ways then. As my units suffer from fallout damage that will take them out in 2 turns, should they stay within it. So, hurry them along and hurry some more nuclear weapons out. The destructive power evident again and again, wiping out population, destroying 7 tiles in total, including the one where the bomb lands, and taking out most units. One thing I did notice it struggled to do sometimes was take out enemy defenses, the actual walls or fortifications, which is a little unusual. I'm not sure if that's a bug or an intended feature. Nonetheless, you can also use them to take out bugs or annoying features like those stacks of bloody cultural people who stand around. The nuclear weapon is a great way to deal with them. Back to the seriousness of the video though, of course the final step is Operation Ivy, the better weapon of mass destruction. Here, unfortunately, we can't actually use it, but rather it ends the game. And even more unfortunately, it's really hard to get there. In this case, as you can see, the game actually ends not through the military victory, but just through time. So, I reload. I head back in, for there's just a few more things I need to figure out. What about an independent people? Do they get mad if I launch it near them? The answer is no, they don't. You'll have to aggravate them and then fire it on them. And unfortunately, it doesn't just completely wipe or clear their villages. I reckon it should. But also, another question, how does it feel to be nuked? So I turn the bomb on myself. The city munches down on a nuclear weapon, wiping out about 11 of its 40 total population, and having the same effect that it had every other time. 7 tiles destroyed. Though this time I can actually see what it feels like, right? What it feels like to be on the receiving end. It did seem to destroy my fortifications, as you'll see in future clips, and the radioactive fallout, as they call it, spreads across the tiles. Their yield is completely gone, completely disabled, and I don't seem to have a project to complete to clear it. Perhaps clearing it with time instead. Speaking of time, it's time to quickly complete Operation Ivy. This is the victory condition. Complete this second project after developing nuclear weapons through the Manhattan Project, and you will win the game through a military victory in Civilization 7. Therefore, it's a pretty stepped process. It relies on some basic scientific unlocks like bombers, as well as some basic cultural unlocks like an ideology. Complete both of those, and then you'll be able to drop the bomb. Important to note, of course, you don't actually need to drop any bombs. The dropping of that Operation Ivy was just a cutscene. It happens automatically once you complete the project. And the other nuclear weapons, well, you don't actually get them until you've already completed the requirements, the settlement capturing, the war requirements. They are, in that sense, in a really strange place. They are both Civilization 7's most powerful weapon, undeniably, and they look great at it. But they're also really late to the party, and honestly, not all that useful in actually completing the military objectives for the modern age. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.